Welcome to Cougar Network News.
Welcome back to Cougar Network News. I'm your host, Whitney Carroll, and unfortunately our co-host, Keyshawn Mosley, was not able to make it today. First up, we have Cougar reporters asking the juniors about their experience on their past ACT. The ACT for me personally was okay. I think I could have done just a little better if I had more time to study, but overall I felt pretty prepared and it was all right. I'm hoping I scored maybe a mid-20, like in the 20s area, but some sections gave me a little trouble. Be sure to study beforehand. So if you know that you're going to take the ACT in 2 months, go ahead and start studying. Don't wait till the last minute. Print out practice tests and fill them out. Mr. Grisham always has free practice tests, and the ACT website has lots of information that you could use, and just any tips online is really helpful.
When I went into the ACT, it went by really fast, and I was not expecting that at all. I thought it was going to take as long as I thought in the ACT prep class, but it wasn't. And the test was not hard at all. It was just, I hate reading, and it was a lot of reading for me. And I think I did very good, actually, but it's just the whole reading part. But none of it was hard. You just had to read in between the lines on certain stuff. But most of it was very easy. My advice to the 10th graders that are taking it next year, just please get a lot of sleep, a lot of rest, because you are going to need it. When you go in there, you don't need to be laying your head down. Try to stay awake through the whole thing. Even if you get done before the time is up, stay awake. And eat a very good breakfast and study for this, because this is very important. This is money, and this is what you need for college.
Let's dive into Black history and its importance here at Blue Mountain High School.
Black History Month is an annual celebration of achievements by African Americans and a time for recognizing the central role of blacks in U.S. history. There has been many changes amongst blacks in our society over the course of years, and changes are still happening today. Just like Coach Regina Chills being the first African American basketball coach in South Tippah. If it weren't for our historical black figures protesting for black equal rights, then who knows if we would have Mr. Bennett or Miss Cook teaching at our own school. We celebrate Black history in the month of February, but that shouldn't mean we forget the importance of Black history as the month goes by.
Today I'm here with Miss Beatrice Cook. So Miss Cook, we tell me a person who inspired you throughout Black History Month.
Sure. Actually, it's a group of people that have inspired me. Although there were many people that made significant changes in Black history, there are three who are here and local. Mrs. Charlena Cobb, Mrs. Laura Strong, and Mr. Colum. These group of people were very instrumental in bringing the voting rights in the 1960s to our area, even going as far as bringing Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer to the small town of Blue Mountain, Mississippi, where she spoke at a church that night, and later that night, the church, the Antioch Missionary Baptist Church, was burnt to the ground. Also, the Carpenters for Christmas are a group of people who are not talked about very much, but they were instrumental in rebuilding that church. And the theme of it was destroyed by hate, rebuilt by love. So there are many people that were instrumental in making a significant change in Black history. But we need to celebrate those that are close and that are at home. And so I just would like to say that for all of those here in the surrounding areas, you inspire me.
Black History Month means to me several things. First of all, it's got to be a celebration of all of the cultural heritage that blacks have contributed to American history. And we're talking about anything from literature to art to music and all of those things. But it's also a time to reflect. It's a time to see the struggles, that have occurred in this country for African Americans, to see how far we've come and to see where we need to be headed. So it encapsulates a lot of things for African American.
Well, when I think of Black History Month, I think of a lot of great inventors that have come before us and have made the world better for each of us today, to where we can enjoy many different things today.
When I think about Black history, I just think about American history, because the two can't be separated necessarily. We have to teach our kids all of the things that happened for this culture and for other cultures as well, not just Black and white cultures. So I tend to not separate the two from each other. Just like when we're attacking history from all different aspects, this month we do specifically look at figures that were big in civil rights movements, figures that made a change, such as Brown versus Board. And today we read a story about how the first school was desegregated and what emotions were going on, and how this little girl was brave enough to go through these things for other people in the future. All right, so as a child, we studied different figures in Black history. So we kind of got to see leaders for cultural movements, for civil rights movements. So I learned a basis on who those people were. And as I grew older, I started to learn how they truly impacted my life and the things that I am able to do now because of the movements that they led. Being in this area specifically, being a Black male, doing what I do, being an educator, helps me be relatable to more of my children. It helps me be able to know the things that possibly they go through at home, such as an older generation that is raising them. Some are raised by their grandparents, which is similar to what happened for me when I was growing up while my mother was in school. So I know the ways that their grandparents that may be raising them handle the issues at home. I know the way that they care about education to a great extent. I know how I can communicate to those parents and grandparents better. So that's a huge advantage for me here, I believe.
Throughout Black History Month, will you tell me some people that inspire you throughout this month?
Rosa Parks. The Tuskegee Airmen.
Rosa Parks.
Dr. King.
Will you tell me some of the things that they have did?
She stood up to the bus driver because the bus driver didn't like Black people.
They fought for African Americans' freedom.
People would say that she was tired, but she wasn't tired physically. She was tired because she was tired of people treating them that way.
He brought the whites and black together.
It is an honor simply because there were so many people before me that laid this out for me, like Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and so many others. So it's just an honor that I was even chosen to even be the one to be the first. I guess looking at the minority, they can look at me as being a person that they also can achieve the things that maybe I have achieved, that there's no barrier through anything, that you can do whatever you want to do whenever you set your mind to it. I don't look at myself as being just an African-American educator. I look at myself being an educator, and an educator is to teach and to influence, and that's the way I just see it. I don't look at it as being an African-American. I'm an educator. Well, I always implement a little bit of history in everything that we do. I mean, whether it's in the gym or in the classroom, because history is what made us today, so they need to know what's going on with that. And, knowing history lets you know that you are a part, and you're going to be a part of history, and you have to lay things out to achieve goals also.
The project was research about history that led up to the Montgomery bus boycott.
We researched the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King led a bunch of people who wanted better jobs.
We are reading about the Freedom Walkers, and this study helped us better understand the process from the end of slavery that has happened to the beginning of the Civil Rights era.
I enjoyed the Harlem Renaissance and learning how the blacks had an opportunity to thrive and develop their culture.
The idea of Reconstruction of the South was interesting, and how the idea led from one to the other, how the Civil War to the Reconstruction to the Great Migration and onward. It was interesting to see how the connective timeline.
Well, this unit we learned about social justice. So the students created a definition of social justice, which is about it's a kind of justice that seeks equality for all. And we have framed that around the speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as well as poetry from the civil rights movement. Black and white authors that wrote about different events throughout civil rights. And they have watched videos of some of those events, including the 16th Street church bombings in Birmingham. They read many different poems about that, including poems about Audre Lorde and Langston Hughes. And they looked at how that poetry helped them to understand the emotion of those events and the importance of those events. They looked at Dr. King's Nobel Prize speech, which ended on a more hopeful note, even though it was taking place at a time that was still fraught with violence and unrest in the American South. They have looked at Dr. King's ideas about education, not just about civil rights, but about education, and compared that to some songs and other poetry. They have read a lot of narrative poems, they've read lyric poems, they've read prose poems, all framing a different perspective throughout the civil rights movement. And I think it overall has helped them to understand how individuals can influence social justice, and that's what had to happen for civil rights to become Dr. King's vision to become more of a reality. I think that it's really important for students, when they understand history, to understand why things happen the way that they do. And I think in seeing like Dr. King's vision and some of the stuff that he espoused, especially like the marches through from Selma to Montgomery and Rosa Parks and all these people, it took one person to get some attention. And you have to be able to stand up and say, this is wrong, and we don't need to stand for it. And whatever it is, and it could be about racism, it could be about sexism, it could be about, anything that doesn't promote equality. And I want them to be able to see that, individuals do have power to change. And that's what was so important with the civil rights movement. We saw these, different leaders and figures emerge through that time that weren't afraid to stand up and say, this is wrong, and we as Americans shouldn't stand for it. And I want them to see that, they have that power as well. When something isn't right, or when they see something that is not, that doesn't promote social justice, I want them to be able to say, Dr. King and people like him, they had something to say about it, whether they wrote about it, whether they marched on it, whether they just supported the people that did do something. I want them to see that individuals can affect change. I think that learning about Black history can impact students today in many ways. First, it helps, especially Black students, young Black people, to see that where we came from, we've still got a ways to go, but we're not where we started, and that's a wonderful thing. But it also helps us to see that, Dr. King called it the Promised Land. One of the last speeches that he made, he told us that, he may not be able to go with us, but we were all going to see the Promised Land. We haven't gotten there yet. But we got to keep his vision alive. Even as, young folks today, we have to keep that vision alive and keep working together to affect change. And I think that it's really important for young people to take up that mantle and continue it, because we never want to go back where we were, but we got a long way to go. And I think that learning about Black history, not just in February, but, throughout your career as a student, is so important for people of color, but also for all teenagers and even younger children to understand. We have to be able to work together as a society, and we have to empathize with one another's struggles. And I think that Black history is a really good opportunity to show students that the struggle of others is going to help our future. And what I want my students to understand, especially when we look at the struggle of those that have had to overcome racial inequality, those things happened here. This used to be a foreground for, racial divide and racial injustice. And Blue Mountain is such a special, unique place that we all tend to get along so well and love each other. It's so hard to think that there was a time that this school, there were only white students that walked its halls. it's hard to remember that. And I think that that's a good thing in a lot of ways because it shows how far we have progressed as a society. But I want my students to be able to see that, we have to understand where we were to understand where we're going. And I want them to continue that legacy of loving one another and get along with everybody as they go from Blue Mountain and they get out into the world. I want them to take that attitude of peace and love and go into a bigger place, bigger than Blue Mountain, and take that same attitude and show people, what it means to come from a place of diversity where racial inequality is still real, but it can also be overcome.
Black history means to me freedom, justice,
Power.
Equality.
Have you ever wondered what your favorite teacher played in high school? Well, let's go with Cougar reporters to find out.
I think I'm just supposed to say, was I involved in athletics when I was in high school? And the answer is yes, I was. I was a cheerleader, which, contrary to many people's belief, it is a sport. It's a year-round sport. But I did play basketball when I was in junior high, but that just wasn't my thing. Cheerleading is more my thing.
I played basketball in school, so that's always been my favorite sport. My dad played basketball. He coached. My sister played. My dad played in college. I just like competition. I've always liked competition. I like to win. I don't play games to lose. And so I feel like why show up and not do your best when you have the opportunity to show people what you're made of? And so I believe in showing out. I believe in playing to win the game.
Tennis, I ran cross country, and I ran track in high school. My motivation in those sports, I had a good coach. His name was Philip Laney. He coaches down at the college now. He would always joke and laugh with us and make us enjoy it, but he'd also show us how serious it was and how having determination here could lead us through the rest of our lives and the things that we do, to show that even when we're tired or hurting or when we want to just lay down, we still have a job to do, and those things carried over for the rest of my life. That experience that I had helps me a lot in teaching now. The sports and the kids that I have now love to talk about sports, so every experience that I had then helps me relate to my kids even more so in the classroom.
I played softball, slow pitch, and fast pitch, because back in the day we actually had slow pitch. They've gotten rid of that now. But I played that all 6 years of my high school, and then I also cheered for 4 years. What motivated me was probably just my strive to always be better. I never wanted to stay the same. I always wanted to be better than I was the day before. So just my motivation of my internal self, I guess you could say. I learned a lot of teamwork, and I also learned how to be a leader and a follower. I learned at times where I needed to sit back and follow who was in charge, and then other times I learned that I needed to step up. I needed to be a leader for those who were younger than me.
And now let's go to Ecuador with Ramon Castro.
Les voy a hablar sobre Ecuador. Ecuador es un país que se encuentra ubicado en Sudamérica y sus diversos paisajes abarcan parte de la selva amazona. Y su famosa capital, Quito, es muy famosa por su centro colonial español y sus palacios maravillosos que se encuentran al lado.
That's all for this week. Have a great weekend.
It's a great event that we have each year, and so cut that.
Yeah. Hello.
Real quick. Okay. Being here and being
oh my gosh, I interrupt this. Hi, how you doing?
You interrupted.
No, I'm offended. I am offended by that.
I can't jump.
Oh, I'm not the screw out of this thing.
PT overall was. Hey. Okay, can we start over?